All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan Smith, and today I'm answering your questions about training for hiking. Now, essentially, what we have on the docket today, we've got a few questions that have been sent in prior to this. We're going to be talking a little bit about managing discomfort when you're actually on the trail. We're going to be talking a bit about mental endurance, a bit about getting back into training after a big adventure, avoiding injuries during strength training, and also how to go about a taper period. And then on top of that, if anyone does have any questions while we are going through this live, you can pop it up in the chat and I'll do my best to answer. So, first question to cover, and this was a question I got sent through the other day. There was a little bit broader context to this and a little bit more information, but this is kind of the main points. Basically, this particular person was currently doing the Tour de Mont Blanc. And they sent me through an email just sort of saying, hey, after working the last 12 months on hip, glute, hamstring, and quad and ankle strength, I'm back where I was after completing 2 hikes last summer with a swollen last knee. So this is not someone that I've sort of worked with specifically, but they've been following my stuff or whatever it may be. Now they sort of said for this year, the first couple of hikes they went on was all good, and they tweaked their ankle, but it wasn't that big a deal. But then on hike number 3 this year round, they've noticed that on the downhill, the right IT band made its discomfort unknown. And they're just asking if there's any tips on handling downhills for the remainder of the trip, assuming you get to do a bit more hiking. And they're currently using some ice, some Aleve, and so a knee brace. And the only advice they currently have is take scheduled breaks on descent. So yeah, this is a bit of a tricky question in the sense that realistically, when it comes down to this type of stuff, the majority of getting on top of this really comes down to prevention. Because by the time it does swell up and get uncomfortable when we're in the middle of a trip, we can manage it to a good degree, but it's probably never going to be super comfortable. And ultimately, if we're sort of in a position where we kind of trained 12 months, leading up to this and kind of still got to where it was, there's probably like a little bit of a mismatch in regards to what was going on in the training and what the body really needed to be prepared for leading into the trip. However, we're saying that, like obviously can't change that now. So when we are on the trail, a few very, very simple things that can make a little bit of a difference. They're not going to be dramatic. They're not probably going to completely eliminate discomfort if it's already swollen up and already uncomfortable, but a few things. First and foremost, on the descents, if that's the main trigger, reducing speed and reducing step length. So scheduled breaks on descent, great. One really, really simple thing you can do to take pressure out of the knees on the way downhill is just reducing your speed. Whatever your natural speed is going downhill, pull it back a little bit. Even if you turn into an absolute crawl and really, really, really slow, that can take a little bit of a pressure. And doing that in concurrent with reducing your step length. So if you're naturally stride down relatively long strides or big strides, make it a little bit smaller, and that can make a bit of a difference. Again, by the time the knee is already uncomfortable, that may not work, or you may already be naturally doing that just to protect the knee, but that is an option that can help. Number two is self massage above and below the issue. So, this is a simple thing that you can do on the trail, in camp, or whatever it may be. And you can apply this to many, many different aches and pains that creep up on the trail. Essentially, what can happen is if a particular area of the body gets really sore, it gets swollen, it gets tight, it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes, if we release the muscles above and below that particular area, it can actually give us a little bit of relief. So we don't want to be like pushing into the actual bit which may be injured or may be sore, but above and below. So in this particular situation, if we got the right IT band, which is a little bit uncomfortable, if this was really down towards the knee and it was like on the side of the knee and that's where the discomfort, that's where the swelling is, then you can sort of think about what are the muscles above and below that? Specifically in this situation, it may be the top of the quadriceps, just on the lateral bit of the quadriceps, and also the top of the calves, which is just below the knee. So then you may be able to get your water bottle, your trekking pole, or if you have like a massage ball, like some people carry those, and just giving a bit of massage on those areas. Alternatively, if it's the IT band more towards the hip, then you can kind of have a think about, okay, what is above and below the hip? Well, we've got our glute muscles, we've got our muscles around the top of the hip, and you can work into the sides of that. And you can also work onto the top of the quad. Like some people in this situation will kind of want to, like, we'll say, hey, I'll do lots of rolling rides on the IT bands or right on that lateral bit of the leg. That can really sometimes be a bit hit and miss whether that actual help. But if you can actually find your quadricep muscles and feel in where the actual muscles are in the front of the leg and finding that sort of the lateral side of that, that can often help. So with this self massage, what we'll look at is basically getting a trekking pole, water bottle, doing a couple of minutes above, a couple of minutes below. That won't fix the issue, but it can give you short-term relief. So essentially, you can look at doing this multiple times during the trip. You can look at doing this on your breaks. You can look at doing this at the end of the day, and it can sometimes help. Massage above and below the issue. Then other things you can look at here, which often don't get thought about first of all, but they can affect, is number one, energy. Fatigue, when we are getting tired and overly tired, this will affect the presentation of pain in the body. If we get overly tired, it can actually ramp things up, make us make worse decisions, make us take poor steps or whatever it may be. So making sure that you're on top of your fueling, you're snacking plenty, you're regularly refueling as you go through, making sure you're sticking to a pace which you are comfortable with. It's not pushing you to your limits. It's not ramping things up, but at a nice, comfortable pace. And also just resting more than you need. All of those will play a big role in regards to your energy. Now, what I say about resting more than you need, a lot of hikers will just hike and hike and hike, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I really need a rest. Try to preempt that. Have a quick rest every 90 minutes to 2 hours, just 5, 10 minutes. Take a second, have a snack, take it easy. That can go a long way in regards to energy consumption, uh, not consumption, conservation. Um, and then finally, last thing you can do is mindset. The tricky thing with pain is if we start to get a bit of pain, we start to think about it. We start to get negative about it. We start to really obsessive about it. And that's just a natural thing. The tricky thing here is that can actually ramp up our sensitivity to pain. If we are getting negative, if we are really focusing on it, it can actually get worse and worse and turns into this like negative feedback loop, which sucks. So this is sometimes easier said than done. But if you can notice if you're getting negative, if you're thinking about it, you're stressing about it, whatever it may be, try to lean on something positive, a positive mantra, just something positive you can repeat again and again and again in your head, just to drown out that negativity, just to distract you a little bit. So it may be a case of saying, I'm having a good time, just repeat that. My legs are strong, just repeat that. I'm in an amazing part of the world, whatever. Just something positive again and again and again, just to drown out that negative stuff. Now, obviously, none of that is kind of like, magic. None of that will kind of fix the issue, but it may just give you a little bits and pieces to just get on top of things, just give it the little bit of push you need to kind of get through. So hopefully a few ideas in there might help. So next question I want to cover is mental endurance. And this is a question came through in the group asking suggestions for mental endurance while hiking for multiple days on a wet trail with lots of rain and dealing with wet feet and wet everything. I find it quite exhausting. And yeah, realistically, when we're in this type of situation where everything's wet, our clothes are wet, our gear's wet, and all of that, it's always going to be tiring. It's always going to suck. It's always going to be never much fun. It's not ideal. Um, and yeah, it does always make things tricky. But essentially, in this situation, there are certain things we can do just to slightly give us an advantage and slightly make things a little bit more enjoyable. Because it is always going to be tough mentally and physically, but there are little percentage gains we can look at here. A few simple things you can look at: periodic rewards. Now, this is something you kind of have to plan for. It's not like really a case of you just sort of deciding this on the trail, but it's more a case of you look at the weather and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm expecting rain. This is not going to be a huge amount of fun. You can plan ahead for this. So essentially what I mean by here is just kind of breaking up the day and giving yourself little rewards and little treats and little things that are nice for you to give you like a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of enjoyment broken up through the day. So a really simple way to look at this is you can look at while you're hiking snacks. If you're looking at your snacks and you're looking at a really rainy, potentially not much fun hike, then say, you know what, I'm just going to make sure every single snack I have is just delicious. It's the stuff that I love. It's the stuff that I really enjoy. I'm not going to worry about like healthy eating or anything. I'm just going to go for pure pleasure. And then essentially what you can do is you can look at a day's worth of hiking and say, you know what, every single hour I'm going to have a little bit of a snack, of a slightly different snack, or I'll break it up. And sometimes just breaking up this into chunks, saying I've got something to look forward to in the next hour, I've got something to look forward to, that can often help us get through this type of thing. On top of that, another thing you can look at is end of day. So you could sort of say, all right, I'm expecting a hike which is going to be mentally exhausting. What can I do at the end of the day which will help me feel good? And again, food related, you can look at comfort foods. You can look at a meal where you're like, hey, actually, that's just something I'm going to look forward to all day. I'm really, really, really like super keen on that. Or you know what, I'm going to have a hot chocolate with my dinner, and that's just going to be something I can sit over or whatever it is. Something that's just really enjoyable that you can look forward to that can just give you a little bit of a pleasure. Now, obviously, in the raining situation, sitting down and cooking a complicated meal, that may be a challenge in itself. So then you may sort of want to think about, okay, what are options I can do here, which maybe doesn't require that. Again, you can sort of have pre-made things that you can just have a dessert in your tent and enjoy it or whatever it is. But thinking about what are regular periodic rewards you can give yourself through the day that can help. Another thing in this type of stuff is, sometimes it can be quite useful to look at the positive reframing side of things. In the sense as if we got wet trail or we got muddy trail or anything kind of goes wrong, we can kind of really get stuck into the negative. And that can kind of spiral. It can just end up mentally exhausting us. It can end up just sucking a lot of fun out of it. But all too often with these types of things, it is possible in certain situations for you to flip this is like miserable to this is fun, this is enjoyable, or whatever it may be. And this is a case of trying to like unleash your inner kid. Because remember, as a kid, we always manage to find the fun in situations, which we don't really right now. And this may be something you want to lean into in this type of situation. So, using the raining example, you could sort of say, all right, you find yourself like, you're going through all of this puddly, muddy stuff, and you're like, my feet are wet, my shoes are wet, I'm just not having a huge amount of fun. Then you may say, you know what, I'm wet already. It's done. There's no point like stressing about it. So maybe let's try to get some fun out of this. Let's maybe just splash along in the puddles. Let's maybe go into those, actually intentionally step in the mud and get that slurp and get that stomp, and just try to reframe it into fun. If you're on a flat set stretch of trail and you're like, oh my gosh, it's completely wet and whatever it may be, have a little skip, have a little like dance, whatever it may be, and think about that inner kid. What can you do? Because sometimes when you kind of go from this negative thing, there's a barrier. And if you can kind of just push through this barrier in the situation of this sucks to, hey, this may be fun, it can really help. You can apply that in a lot of different situations. It doesn't always work, but can also be useful. And another thing which can help with this type of stuff, and specifically in the rain in this example, is leaning into a little bit of mindfulness in the sense that if we're hiking along and we're wet, we're nasty, again, we can focus on the negative and it can really wear us down. On the mindfulness side of things, the whole idea about this is really, really connecting with where you're at in the moment, really, really connecting with your senses and how you're feeling and what you're thinking. And this is a really simple exercise you can do in this situation or many other situations which can help. So as you're hiking along, one thing you can do is just basically go through a checklist around what your senses in your body is actually going on. So for example, if you're in the rain, spend 5 minutes literally stomping along and put all your attention, all your focus into just listening. Listen what's going on. Listen to the rain. Listen to the sound your shoes are making. Listen to the sound of your voice. Listen to any wildlife or whatever it may be. Spend 5 minutes of this purely just listening. Then spend 5 minutes smelling. Really put attention to what can you smell. Smell the rain, smell your sweat, smell the mud, smell whatever's in the air, whatever it may be. Then shift on to feel. What can you actually feel? Can you feel the rain on your skin? Can you feel the squelch in your boots? Can you feel your hair all slick or whatever it may be? And focus into that. Even taste, you can do this in this situation. Stick out your tongue, taste the rain, taste the sweat coming off your face or whatever it may be. Um, that's four senses. I'm having a little mental break. Listen, smell, feel, touch. Touch. My gosh, forgot touch. And then, yeah, and then touch. Like, just again, oh no, feel. That's the same. I don't know. Whatever the other sense is, I'm having a mental blank. But yeah, whatever the fifth sense is, focus on that. And this is a really interesting exercise you can do, like the day-to-day life for mental well-being. But in this situation, this again can kind of flip it into a positive. You may spend 5 minutes doing this and be like, well, you know what? That was actually really relaxing. I'm calm, I'm present, I'm having a good time. And you come out the other end like, hey, that was actually really cool. So when it comes down to this, there's a few little bits and pieces that can help. Obviously, it may not completely turn things around, and it is going to be tough mentally and physically in that situation. But hopefully, that gives a few ideas you may be able to play around with it in another situation. And whoever can tell me what the other sense is, if you want to plug it into comments and chat, just so I don't drive myself mental, that'll be lovely. But yeah, so coming down, next question. We are talking about getting back into training. And this is a really common one. So many people fall into. Basically, the question was, I'm having a hard time getting back into training without a goal after trekking the Tour de Mont Blanc. I took a week off except for walking, and then I had company, and now I'm out of practice and out of routine. Where do I start? I really don't want to work as hard as I did, but I do need strength and cardio. Really, really, really common situation. Everyone falls into it. In the sense, if we have a big goal in our sights, it can be very, very easy to focus on our training, put all of this time and attention and effort into this. So we build ourselves up and it's all very doable. We come out the other end and we're like, okay, I don't have a goal in my sights. Motivation isn't quite there. Perfectly fine. On top of that, thinking back, I put so much time and attention into everything I did before, and that was great. But right now, I don't really want to put that much time and effort in. But also, I'm aware that I felt good when I'm training. I'm aware that I build up all the strength and cardio. I want to maintain it. What can I do? Um, the tricky thing here is so many people kind of fall into the all or nothing approach, which you don't want. Just to be very, very clear, you do not have to go to doing back what you were doing before. You don't want to put pressure on yourself that you're going to fall into this. If I'm not doing everything I was before, not working as hard, it's not worth my time. We want to get back in a routine. The most important thing when you get back from a trip, if you don't have another goal in your sight, is just getting back in some type of routine again. Doesn't have to be the same routine, but some type of routine. Now, simple way to approach this, there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but this is really, really simple. Anyone can do. Right now, ask yourself the question. Off the top of your head, don't put too much thinking into thought of this. How much do I want to try to train each week? Now that I'm back, now that I'm settled, how much do I want to try and train each week? And answer yourself in number of sessions per week, how long you want to commit to those sessions. Just at the top of your head, come up with that answer. From there, once you come up with that answer, then what you want to do is you want to reduce that expectation down to, maybe 2/3, 3/4 of that. And then whatever that reduced number is, that's going to be your target for the next week. Now, the idea behind this is typically we'll sort of come up with a number and we'll say, yeah, cool, we can do this. We usually overestimate things. If our motivation is low, we still will kind of overestimate things. And the tricky thing with that is if we set ourselves a goal and we fail, sometimes that can be just tough getting the routine. So we want to be nice to ourselves. We want to give ourselves a better chance of being success, being positive, and getting back into things. So reduce things down. So to give you an example of what this may look like, your first thought, you may say, look, I want to get back into training 4 times a week for 60 minutes. Maybe that's your first thought. Then we look at reducing it down. Then we might say, okay, maybe that is a bit much. Let's reduce it down to like 3 times a week for 45 minutes. Start with that. And then from here, what we do is we just do this for 1 week. We set ourselves a target, we plan out our sessions, plan out what we're going to do, and we just focus on 1 week. Don't even think about the future, just focus on 1 week. If you get to the end of the week and you're like, cool, I did it, happy days, like that was great, I got the sessions done, that was awesome. Then ask yourself, okay, what am I going to do next week? Do I want to just keep the same in next week and just do that and stick with that? Or do I feel like I'm feeling good and I want to do a little bit more? If you want to keep the same as next week, awesome. Do the same again next week. Happy days, do that. If you want to progress, just add a little bit extra. You may add an extra 5 minutes or an extra 10 minutes or an extra 15 minutes or something like that. Just add a little bit and then do another week and then ask yourself, do I want to keep it the same? Do I want to progress? And just keep on working through that. Very, very, very simple way of sort of building things up. Alternatively, if you do the first week or you do any other week and you fail and you're like, I set myself this target 3 times a week for 45 minutes, but I only end up doing 2 sessions. Then reduce it down again, reduce that expectation. Say, you know what, actually, next week, I'm going to aim for 3 sessions for 30 minutes, or I'm going to aim for 2 sessions for 45 minutes. Take it down and keep on reducing it down until you find something that works for you. And then once you do find something that works for you, you can basically make that decision. Do you just keep it the same week by week? Do you want to progress it? Whatever it may be, perfectly fine. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go about this, but that is a very, very simple approach. I think it can work quite well, and it's a nice way of easing you back into things without putting too much pressure on yourself. So maybe give that a go. All right. So flying through these, next question. We're going to talk about avoiding injuries during strength training. So the question was, during my strength training weeks for a particular goal, I sprained my neck, not during the session, but sprained my neck. Unfortunately, escalated to pain in my upper arm. Now I'm going through physio and painkillers and all of that. I've lost almost 3 weeks of good training. Any suggestions on how to avoid such situations, if at all possible? So first and foremost, whenever this type of situation, always chat with your physio. They are the best source because they will know what's going on with the injury, what sort of specifically like is going on with your body. Always have a chat with them. But if you were looking for some general general ideas, yeah, for this we can talk through a bit of an idea. Now, sometimes, and I'm not saying this is exactly your situation, but sometimes if we are doing strength training, and it may not be during the session, but around the sessions, we kind of sprain something or tweak something or whatever it may be. Sometimes that can be a case of like you're just going through your training. That particular area has gotten really, really stressed out during that training. It's kind of been on the edge of just like, having too much. And then something happens during the weekend, you clear it up. So you may, break your neck by looking around. You may sort of make a weird movement or whatever it may be. So sometimes in this situation, if you're aware that hey, it was during my strength training weeks, maybe looking at manage your intensity during your strength training. There's a really simple thing anyone can apply, which can take a little bit of a risk away from things going wrong. So what I mean by this is the way a lot of people approach their strength training is they like to train to what we call failure, meaning they'll do an exercise and they'll choose a weight or choose an intensity where basically they just get to the end of the set and they just can't do anymore. They literally push it to the end point where they're just like, I cannot do anymore. They're shaking away or the legs are absolutely wobbly or whatever it may be. A lot of people push to that point. Um, and that's pretty common. Now, this does feel good. A lot of people really enjoy it. They like get to the end, they're like, yeah, that was like my limit. I couldn't do any more. And that was really, really, really good. And it does feel good. But when it comes down to it, as much as it does feel good, and a lot of people are like, hey, no pain, no gain, I've got to push hard to develop strength. Realistically, this isn't particularly necessary for strength development. This pushing to the absolute point of strength failure. For 99% of people, you can get incredibly strong with never having to push to that point. Now, there may be a small 1% of people who probably do need to do this, and that's more the bodybuilding, powerlifting side of things, or even professional athletes who need to do that. But for hikers, not particularly necessary. Now, the one drawback to this type of thing is if we are pushing to that failure point and that really, really difficult stuff, is often, not always, but often, the last reps of an exercise, when you're getting to that point, you're just pushing that last little bit out, like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm really tired. That's kind of where tweaks and niggles can come from in the sense that sometimes we'll just get really tense and we'll put a little pressure in certain areas. Sometimes we'll get to this point and we'll get a little bit lazy with our form and we'll do an exercise and all of a sudden we're doing weird things and other areas of the body are doing movements. And it's usually this last little period where things tend to come from. So a really simple way of minimizing this is using a slightly different approach. As opposed to going to failure, what I like my hikers to do is work at what we call 2 reps in reserve. So what that means is when you're doing an exercise, you always have 2 reps left over. To give you an example of what this looks like, let's sort of say you're doing an exercise and the target you set yourself, you're going to do 10 repetitions of the exercise. So instead of finding a weight where by the end of the 10, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm cooked, I can't do any more. What we want to do is we want to find a weight which if you really, really push to that point and really, really push that limit, you actually could do 12 reps. That's your kind of like your failure point. But instead, we just do 10 reps. So we always have 2 reps in reserve. Now, this does take a little bit of trial and error because every exercise will be different. It sometimes gets a little bit tricky, like, you choose a weight and it's way too easy. Then you choose a weight, it's way too difficult. And then you've got to have a bit of back and forth. But it's definitely worthwhile playing around with because this approach, it will still be really, really effective for strength. It will still give you the stimulus you need to move that forward and improve your strength, but it can significantly reduce the risk of things going wrong. But just by taking out those last couple of reps where things tend to fall apart or things do tend to just get overworked or whatever it may be, not tend, but sometimes get overworked, this takes that pressure out. And I quite like doing this. And for my hikers, I probably get them doing 98% of their training at that rate. And that's what I ask them to do, the 2 reps in reserve. And over time, we just keep on getting stronger, getting stronger, getting stronger. It can work for a long, long time. Occasionally, I might ask them to do what we call as many reps as we can, where we just push as much as we can for an exercise, but it's not particularly necessary for the most part. And without knowing anything else about your particular situation, this could be a really, really, really simple approach which can reduce the risk of things just getting overworked, things getting tight, and tweaks coming on in the future. So hopefully that helps. And then the final question that I've had sent through, and I will say, anyone who is watching live, if you did have any questions you wanted me covered, please just pop up in the chat. I'm happy to answer. But the final question I've had sent through prior to this was talking about the taper. And essentially, this person was asking the question, I have a backpacking trip coming up in about a month. At what point should I start to taper down my training and rest up before the hike? Now, there's a lot of different ways you can approach the taper period. Essentially, the whole idea around the taper is we don't want to kind of continually train normal training all the way up to our endpoint. Because we don't, when it comes to our training, the body doesn't get fitter, stronger, more resilient when we actually train. The body gets fitter, stronger, more resilient when we recover from training. And is usually a little bit of a delay between when you do a training session and when actually adaptations fully consolidate and make you better. On top of that, when you're going through a training process, there usually is quite a bit of accumulated fatigue after week after week after week as you work through the sessions. And we don't want that fatigue entering into a trip. So the idea behind a taper is in the last little period before you head off on an adventure, we just pull things back a little bit, take things a little bit easier to make sure you can consolidate all that training you've been doing. And the body creates adaptations. So you enter your trip feeling as good as you can. And also number two, making sure all that fatigue is gone. But also on top of that, some people go the other way of things and they say, okay, I train. Then the last couple of weeks, I just do absolutely nothing. But that's also a mistake because we don't want to do that because we want to make sure that the body keeps moving. It doesn't tighten up, make sure the body's familiar with all our exercise and maintains our strength. And also there tends to be a lot of stress in the last sort of period before you go away. So we want to manage that and keep things going along. So there's many ways you can approach this taper period, but a really simple approach to this is I like to, if we're looking at a big hiking adventure, taper 2 weeks before a trip. And a big hiking adventure is something that you've been training for quite a while. 2 weeks before a trip. Essentially, the timeline of what this looks like is 2 weeks before your leave date. That's typically when you schedule in your longest, hardest training hike. That's the last hard session you do. After that, then we begin to pull things back. I like to do 1 week of what I call medium training, where basically you take whatever you did in the previous week, except for your hiking, you do the same sessions, but just reduce things down significantly. So the idea behind this is the sessions still keep you moving, you're still doing a bit of work, but it feels pretty manageable, feels pretty easy. So in the situation of strength training, you may do exactly the same strength workouts you were doing before, but you may just reduce the number of sets you did. So if you were doing exercises for like 3 sets before, then this week you just do 2 sets. Very simple. Or you may say, you know what, actually, I'm going to do the same amount of sets, but I'm going to reduce my repetitions. So if I was doing 10 reps of an exercise, maybe you just go down to 7 reps with the same amount of weight. So the idea behind this is you do exactly the same, just pull things back a little bit. Same thing with cardio, you can either reduce the time or the speed. So if you were doing, say, stair climbing, you may say, hey, I did 30 minutes last week. This week, I'm just going to do 20 minutes with the same pack weight. So it feels easier. Or if I was doing pack walking, I did 90 minutes last week. This week, I'm going to do 60 minutes, whatever it is. But you just pull things back slightly. 1 week of that of medium training. And then from there, we do 1 week of really easy training where we barely do anything at all. All we are doing is just doing enough to manage stress to keep the body moving over. There's lots of different ways you can approach this, but I quite like, just sort of scheduling in a short, flat pack walk session each day this week before you go away. And what I mean by that, 10 to 30 minutes with your full pack weight for the trip, just stretch your legs, cruise along. That's it. On top of that, each day just do a little bit of mobility work, some stretching, some self-massage each day. So you may end up doing 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of total movement through the day, and you're doing this each day of the week, but it's very simple, very gentle. And the idea behind this is by the time you get to your last day, just before the trip, you're kind of full of like nervous energy. You're ready to go. You're excited. You're fresh. And away we go. And I quite like this because it kind of finds that nice balance between keeping things ticking over, but making sure you're ready to roll. As I said, there's a lot of different ways you go about this. If you were doing like a medium trip, like it wasn't outrageously difficult, you may just taper off for 1 week and literally just do training, then just do 1 week of that. But for the bigger trips, I quite like this. So hopefully that answers your question. So at this stage, that's everything I've had sent through to me prior to this call. If anyone watching live did have any questions they would like covered, feel free to plug it into chat and I'm happy to cover while we're here. But if nothing comes through in the next minute or so, I'll probably wrap things up. So far away if you've got them. But yeah, but with that being said, if nothing else particularly comes through, hopefully that answers questions. Hopefully that helps a few people, and hopefully for anyone watching now or in the future, you have enjoyed today and got a little bit out of it. Now, if anyone did have any questions they would like covered in future lives, feel free to send them over to me. Post up in the training for hiking group. Send me an email if you prefer, whatever it may be. I'm happy to cover them as we go through. But all in all, well, I think I might wrap things up there and then might go duck off and have a little bit of lunch. So thanks again for watching. I hope everyone has a lovely, lovely day, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon. Bye.